Watching Agenda, time to bring in our panel of political strategists. Grahame Morris here with me in Canberra and Bruce Hawker in the Sky News Centre. Very good afternoon to both of you. I just want to start on the tax debate. You've both seen this GST debate over many years and now it's back with a vengeance. Dan Teen was just talking to us. He's a government backbencher saying we should expand the GST to financial services. So lots of bank fees and charges would be hit with the GST. It would raise nearly $5 billion a year. Grahame, how do you think this whole debate's going at the moment, the sort of open-ended nature of it?
Well, I think the government's a bit lucky. They've had a few practices. We had Fight Back, and I put the exclamation mark, believe it or not, in Fight Back.
That was
the
you.
Brand. That was me. And then you had John Howard with his exercise, and I was his chief of staff when he went on the Sunday program, and I think Helen Daly was fronting Sunday in those days, and there was an interview with Laurie Oakes, and the PM said, I'm going to announce we're having a GST. And beauty. And so, you know, Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison and everyone will have learnt from the two practices. I think everyone thinks there is a need for an update in the tax system. And of course the GST has to be part of it. The thing that's the tricky bit is when do you announce it? And you know, I'm a great believer that I think this time they can bore everybody to death. I think you would have a normal budget, it's a bit of a holding budget, and come about August, you would announce what you're going to do.
Really? That late?
Well, that's 3 months before the election. If the election,
but it means another
plenty of time.
It means another 7, 8 months between now and then of
this.
It's
8 or 9 months of the government and everyone holding their nerve and just saying we are talking, we are consulting. But the opposition has already said no, so. You know, if I were a female jockey and they wanted to know, I'd just say, get stuffed. You know, they're not in it.
Bruce, what do you think about that idea? Another 8 or 9 months of, you know, the sort of questions that the government's getting and the sort of answers it's consulting, it's listening, it's weighing everything up.
Yeah, well, it's good to consult, but of course, if you've got a very activist opposition, then they can have a field day with that, because every time some backbencher comes out with a new idea, then the opposition can be all over it like a bad suit, and hopefully they would be, given that they've made it quite clear that they're opposed to an increase in the GST. So the downside for the government is that the longer they protract the exercise, the longer they allow various speculations to occur as to how wide it's going to go, how high it's going to go, what's going to be covered, what's not, the more opportunity there is for the opposition to really go after them. But the opposition really has to be very focused and very determined here, because I think it is its best opportunity that it's had, certainly since Abbott was removed, to take Turnbull on and the government in an area where, frankly, we know from past experience the Australian electorate is quite nervous. And we can, you know, already there's been evidence to show that the lowest income earners are going to be hit hardest by a 15% GST, depending on how it's structured, and that the wealthy aren't going to pay so much. So there's plenty of grist for the mill if the opposition is really very, very focused, and they have to be, I'm sorry.
But what do you think about, Bruce, what do you think about how Malcolm Turnbull's responding to this? I mean, he's saying it's inconceivable that you wouldn't compensate low-income earners, low-income households. And that's a fair point, isn't it?
Well, but how far are they going to compensate them? And that's the sort of question. This is what all the modelling is going to be about. And the advice that I've received is that, you know, modelling can take about 6 months to do. So it's not a simple case of just plucking these numbers out of the air for the government. Once you start this process, once the genie gets out of the bottle, you can't stuff it back in again and say, oh well, we'll wait for a few months to see what what we come up with. There's going to be speculation, there's going to be discussion, everyone's going to be modelling, everyone's going to be polling on the issue, and yes, there will be compensation, but as Golda Meir said, once you have to explain, you've lost. And that's the problem with the GST. That's what Hewson found to his detriment in 1993, and it's almost what Howard found in 1998.
Well, Grahame, let me ask you this, because in a strategic sense, the main thing for the government to do right now is to explain why we need tax reform. Do you think they're doing that? Do you think they've done that? Do people know why we need tax reform?
No, not yet. Not yet, but that's why I think it takes a long time. You know, there are a lot of parts to this. And, you know, mums and dads are out there at the moment, they are saying, oh, isn't somebody saying something about tax? And that's about all we've got. They haven't got past that. And it's very important. I think the Scott Morrison approach, which is we've got to explain the why, is fantastic. About time. Not just on tax, but particularly on tax. And I don't think anyone has yet explained, all the problems with the current system and the fact that it is pretty well last century's tax system, and it's just not going to do what we want it to do now. And the other thing, we've got all the premiers have already spent the money. The business community has already spent the money giving themselves a tax cut. You've got all the welfare people think they're going to get all the money, and somebody else there, all the backbenchers think they're going to get a heap of money to throw around. We're still a long way away from deciding what it looks like, why we're doing it, let alone what it looks like. And I think that ought to take 6 to 9 months.
But there's plenty of room for disappointment there, isn't there? When you think that the taxpayers are wondering what's going to happen, the backbenchers are saying what's going to happen, business community's already spent the money and so forth. They're the sorts of areas where an effective opposition will be over that and say, well, actually, that may not be what's going to happen. You could end up being very disappointed. And we've seen that in the past. This is why, of course, Abbott doesn't want, Turnbull doesn't really want to have an aggressive opposition around this issue, because he sees it potentially falling apart if he doesn't have a very disciplined approach. I think he'd be better off having a reasonably narrowly cast debate around what he wants to do, and do it rather soon, rather than letting all the speculation continue for too long, and then his people with the arguments as to why they're going to go down this path and why it's only going to be, there's going to be compensation to the less well-off and how much it's going to be, and go about selling that message. Otherwise, it could get very confusing for them.
It could be disappointment too, Bruce, with whatever Labor does. I just see the Fairfax reporter Latika Burke has just put up a story saying that Labor's looking at increasing cigarette taxes again to net another $40 billion over 10 years. I don't know. Can you go to that well too often? It's a pretty popular area to slug.
Can I tell you this, David? When we did this work, when Rudd was returned to the leadership and increased the tax on cigarettes, polling that was done subsequently showed that you could have increased it even further, and the Australian electorate was very, very sympathetic to the argument that as long as that money essentially went towards health, then you were going to get a very sympathetic response from the electorate.
Well, apparently this money would go towards the Gonski education reform. So we'll see what they do. Hey, I just want to get both of your thoughts very quickly. Bruce, you first on the Royal Commission. Now, we saw Friday night the council assisting the Commission confirmed that Bill Shorten in his submission hasn't done anything unlawful or criminal. Just specifically, though, on the opposition leader, where do you think this whole Royal Commission has left him? Has it damaged him?
Look, I think it's done some damage. You can't, be in the eye of the storm for so long without taking some, damage out of it. And of course, that was why he was so angry when the Royal Commission released that statement at 8 p.m. on a Friday night, essentially exonerating him, certainly saying there were going to be no criminal actions or other proceedings taken against him. This is something which has caused some ongoing problems for him. There's no doubt about that. When you have a multi-million-dollar Royal Commission doing this sort of work, then it's going to have some damage. That's not to say that some good things haven't come out of it. I think some good things have come out of it, and they should be, getting out and exposing those union officials who have done corrupt things and eroded the system. But I think Bill Shorten deserves a better run out of it than he got, and I think
Grahame, what do you think, Grahame?
Well, I think he's a very lucky boy. He sat on top of a huge dung heap with grubs all around him. Everyone else had huge dry cleaner bills, trying to get all the filth off them each week, but Mr. Shorten stood above it.
Well,
that's
maybe
nice.
Because he was above it.
But I think it does show what Bruce. I think it does show what we've known all along, and that is there are some grubs in the trade union movement, and it's time the Labor Party did something about it.
We've got to go. We're right out of time. Okay. We might come back to this. Bruce Hawker, Grahame Morris. Thank you both very much for joining us this afternoon. Quick break, and back with more.